Okay, you're good to start whenever.
All right. Well, hi, everyone, and thank you for attending HCN's newest live stream. Today, we're going to be talking about mining in Utah. I'm Nick Bolin. I'm a contributor with HCN, and we've got Brooke Larson here. He's also a contributor, and the author of a recent three-part series on the kind of end, or maybe not so much end, of coal in Utah's coal country, along with energy transition. How these communities are evolving culturally that have been dependent on coal mining for so long. It's a fascinating series. You guys should all go check it out. And we also have Kenny Fallon here, the publisher of the Green River Observer, which is a new local news source in Green River, Utah. Kenny, saw a gap, saw a news desert, found that his neighbors needed good public information and that it wasn't being provided, and has filled the gap with the Green River Observer, which publishes in print once a month, and you can also find it on Substack. And yeah, filling local news gaps is probably about the most admirable thing I can think of these days. So I'm really excited to talk to you both. Brooke, I want to start with you. So your series, it was a three-part series, and it touched on so many different things. And I think one of the most interesting things about it is, you always hear about coal declining and all this stuff, and coal mines in the area can't find enough workers. And this was one of our most read stories of 2024, as I recall. And I think just that unusual framing got a lot of people to click on it. So can you start there and sort of tell us where the state of the energy transition away from coal and towards other forms of energy generation in what was Utah's coal country? Where does that stand right now?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the more interesting things I learned when I started this reporting, was that the mines can't find enough workers. I early on talked with the United Mine Workers of America, their headquarters in Price, Utah, Mike Dalpaz there, and started asking, like, so what's needed to help coal miners transition to other jobs? And he's like, well, the mines can't find enough workers. Like, we don't have a ton of miners out of work right now. It's sort of like this interesting period where there were a lot of layoffs, kind of in the 90s and early 2000s. And now it's sort of the stage where, those miners have aged out. Not as many young people are wanting to go into the industry. And some of the main things I heard was just the jobs aren't as competitive these days. Mining used to be a very high paying, good benefits jobs, especially after the UMWA came into the picture and, secured safety, secured pay, secured pensions for miners. As the union mines have all shut down in Utah, so there's no more union mines. The mines that do exist do not have to be as competitive. So the rates of pay increases have not sort of matched the increase in inflation. So those wages just aren't as competitive. But I do want to say, though, that in this area, Carbon and Emery County in eastern Utah, definitely high rates of poverty there than other parts of the state. So these wages still are higher than, say, tourism service industry jobs in the area. There's just also opportunities. I hear that, young people are going into coding boot camps or, virtual remote work. There's just different options now. And some people just told me that, frankly, they don't want to go into mining because it's really hard on your body. It's, safety has improved, but it's still wears on your body. One of my sources talked about having bad hips, having bad knees, that he's likely going to leave the industry soon. He's in his 50s, simply because his body can't take it anymore. So, yeah, I think various reasons why people aren't wanting to work in the mines anymore. And the industry is just not what it used to be. There used to be a lot of mines. There's no more mines in Carbon County. They're trying to reopen one right now, actually. Since I did this reporting, that's a more recent development, but that's still sort of in the potential permitting process. And there's 4 active mines in Emery County, but they're not producing at the same level. It doesn't look the same as it did at the peak in sort of the 80s and much earlier.
And then, one of your other stories in the series was about how, some of these local governments are, with kind of varying degrees of seriousness, trying to anticipate what a transition away from not just coal, but also, coal-fired power plants might look like. Can you kind of fill us in on, where that transition stands, and not just where the transition stands, but also the importance of these power plants to the tax base of these municipalities, and what they're anticipating or what they're hoping could fill it at that magnitude, both job wise and with other kind of local funding mechanisms.
Yeah. So this area has 2 large coal-fired power plants. There used to be another one. So Emery County has 2, Hunter and Huntington, and then Carbon County used to have a plant as well, the carbon plant, but that shuttered in 2015. It has been on the kind of near to 10 to 15 years horizon that these plants would close. Pacific Corp, or Rocky Mountain Power, the kind of local version of Pacific Corp, has been planning to close these, but in the latest integrated resource plan they just put out, there's no more retirement date. And so it has been a moving target, is what I heard from local community members, both who work on this on the policy side as well as folks who work at the power plants. And that creates a lot of uncertainty for the workers as well as for local leaders in planning. And my main understanding of why the state keeps moving is because of federal and state policy. I think why there is no longer a retirement date is likely because the Trump administration has committed to keeping coal plants open and rolling back emissions regulations and things like that. So we'll see what happens. But the fact of the matter is also that these plants are old. It's expensive to maintain and run old coal-fired power plants. And so it's also just simply cheaper to do solar or natural gas. That's a big reason why coal has been on decline, is that natural gas and solar have just become a lot cheaper. So, I mean, in Utah specifically, to just like pull up some numbers from the story, in 2000, 94% of the electricity Utah generated came from coal. Today, that number's, or in 2023, that number was 47%. And renewables, largely solar, was 17%. So the makeup of the generated electricity in Utah has changed quite a bit. But with these plants closing, it will have significant economic impact. I mean, the mines that do still exist are there because these plants exist. That coal is also exported out of state or out of the country, but those power plants provide the steadiest place for that coal to go. So that's a lot of jobs that are lost at the existing mines, let alone the plants. And then a lot of jobs in the community through these plants, people driving materials, people who may do repairs on the plants. The railroad is all tied up in this. So there's a lot of indirect impacts as well. And the larger thing that I think you mentioned too is tax dollars. So the power plants and the utility infrastructure contributes around 60% of Emery County's property taxes, which is just really significant. Property taxes are really important, especially in rural communities where you don't have these big cities with a lot of sales tax dollars. And so that impacts all aspects of the community, which I think Kenny could probably speak to as well. Public services, roads, all these things that are covered through property taxes. So I think that was a piece that I don't hear talked about very much in this conversation, is just how much this industry also contributes to the tax base, and why that's such an important part of the energy transition conversation.
Yeah, so speaking of what comes next for this area, Kenny, you've done a lot of reporting on various proposals related to lithium, also uranium, proposals for uranium mill and processing there, and you've covered everything from concerns about groundwater contamination and public health, but also, the economic potential in an area that, really prides itself on being a mining hub. And I guess I'm curious if you could talk about how viable are kind of new non-coal forms of mining and processing and refining. Could these actually be a replacement for the economic hole, the really significant economic hole that coal will inevitably leave that Brooke just described?
Yeah, I think that's the hope locally, or among a lot of people locally, is that these jobs with newer or less used resources and different technologies might still have the same head of household kind of income that a lot of people, especially older folks, in recent memory remember Green River, the city and the area, just culturally being a lot different when people had one job and maybe didn't still were able to more comfortably cover bills and volunteer more in the community. So there's kind of like a hope that just trying to pursue almost all of the above, with some reservations, would kind of replace some of, in Green River's case, kind of like help revive Green River since the decline that has uh, kind of continued since the missile base left and the uranium mill back in the 60s closed down. Just since 2010, there's been like about an 11% decline in population, and so there's just a lot of young people that either can't find housing or decide that they don't want to work in the mostly hospitality focused jobs, and so they move away. And there's a lot of hope that the kinds of jobs that these newer companies and newer processes bring in could kind of reverse that decline. So um, it's not quite desperation, but it's close to it, because there's been a lot of broken promises with companies that have come in with high expectations before. So yeah, the current projects, the one that's the furthest along is probably Anson Resources. It's an Australian company that mainly focuses on lithium extraction, but they have a lot of holdings on a lot of projects to where they could pivot to other kind of resources, I guess. But that their project near the river and also near the old uranium tailings pile is the furthest along permitting wise and like developmentally.
Can you talk a little bit more about the water concerns that some locals are expressing about the Anson project in an area that, as I understand it, that water is already pretty. I mean, you guys are on a large tributary of the Colorado River, which is very over allocated already. And I guess I'm curious, that these are water intensive operations. And can you just give us a sketch of the concerns that this company is going to have to overcome about its impact on local water?
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the biggest things, especially that's kind of thrown some obstacles to their process so far. Um, Anson and their subsidiaries, Blackstone and A1 Lithium. So A1 is like the company that is U.S. based, but I'm just going to say Anson because it's just easier than all the smaller companies. Anson, with this plant, is wanting to do and is testing out one of the newer forms of extracting lithium called direct lithium extraction, or DLE. And one of their big selling points on why it should be pursued at all is because it would use a lot less water than more conventional lithium extraction. That I think there's a good deal of that, or there has been attempts of that at Great Salt Lake. And so that they already kind of came in saying, look, this is, they're actually claiming it's a non-consumptive water use, because the idea is they extract the lithium brine, then take out the lithium, and then put the remaining water without the lithium back into the earth, and they have a permit for that. So that's their case, and that is the case they made to the state water engineer to get 19 CFS of water rights. And right now, maybe one of the larger things that's kind of I don't know specific. They haven't really talked much about like what effect this is having, but there is an active lawsuit that is a couple locals and some regional nonprofits that are basically arguing against the state, and they're suing the state engineer, saying that it's not a non-consumptive water use. It's too close to where they're drilling, is too close to the tailings pile and also too close to the Green River, and that they have not the group suing is claiming that Anson has not adequately proved that there's no connectivity between the water they're extracting from and the Green River itself. Which, yeah, as you pointed out, we're not water rich in Utah. Green River City is actually in this weird situation where, on paper, we are like pretty water rich, which only goes so far as long as there's water there to take from. And so that's actually Anson and the lithium projects are the furthest along, but that's also my understanding is why there was a plan over a decade ago to build a nuclear plant here, and also there's different companies that are interested specifically because the city of Green River has that would have been a good thing for me to know off the top of my head, but they have kind of 2,000 acre feet that if they don't have like a viable use for that 2,000 acre feet by either this October or next, gosh, then they'll lose it. Basically, it was water rights that were granted to the city when Flaming Gorge Reservoir was built in the 50s, and they were going to expire in the 90s. But the city was able to make the case that a ton of growth was just over the horizon, and so they were given an extension until this year or next. And oddly enough, there's only been a decline and not a quadrupling of the city, but that's actually to preserve that 2,000 acre feet. Like that has kind of incentivized the they've just said it. The city council would like an industry that can use that, and so I guess that's kind of a tangent because Anson is specifically saying that they're not connected to the river and that they're going to use virtually no water. But it is kind of this odd situation where there's a group in town that does not believe they've proven that it's like totally like safe and it won't have an effect on the river water or the few wells in town. And then the city also would like more industries to come in and be able to make use of the water.
Yeah, your dispatches from some of those public meetings where these various interests are kind of all meeting are really fascinating. Yeah, I'm glad you're there to cover it. Brooke, I wanted to circle back to something you said, which was about, just, there's the kind of dollar and cents argument for why these communities are understandably missing the coal industry, but there's also this kind of cultural, hold that the industry has on it. And, you wrote about, just like these areas are proud of being, the kind of contributing to keeping the lights on and Utah being an energy exporter all these years. And this showed up about coal. This showed up in the Christmas festival you reported on. And I wonder if, you could expand on that a little bit, just the ways in which the energy transition isn't just, it's not just economics we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that was important to me with these stories, just because coal, even if it's not as big of a player economically as it was a few decades ago, it still is very central culturally. I mean, you drive through Carbon and parts of Emery County, and you'll see, statues of coal miners. It's just there's like plaques where mine disasters have happened. It's just kind of everywhere visually if you're looking. And everyone I talked to, whether it was a source I was setting up an interview with or, someone at the diner counter, talked about someone they knew who worked in the coal industry if they didn't work in it themselves. A grandpa who worked in the mine, dad who worked at the power plant, and that goes back generations. A lot of folks in this area, Carbon and Emery County are pretty unique from the rest of Utah. One of my sources, I think, called Helper, specifically a town in Carbon County, like the black sheep of Utah. It had brothels until a couple decades ago, and bars on Main Street, just very different than sort of the Mormon history of a lot of Utah. Immigrants from over 20 different countries, I believe, at least 27 languages were spoken there at the turn of the century. So it just has a very different history. And I think that immigrant history is tied into the coal industry, obviously, but just also makes it feel quite a bit different. And there's pride in both the coal history, but that's very tied up in that, like, my ancestor immigrated here to work in the coal mines and they worked hard. Or like my great grandpa died in the coal mines. Like, people died. If they didn't die then, they have black lung now. So people gave their lives to this industry, and there's a lot of feeling of like, we kept the lights on and still do keep the lights on, in many ways, for the state, for the country. And so I think when people from Salt Lake City come down and say we need to close these coal plants or mines, and there's no recognition of that, I do think people feel feel bad that their identity, that there's no gratitude, that it's just sort of shaming something that we did rely on for many years. So
yeah, it was so interesting to see you get interviews with current and former miners. Some they would express in some ways almost they were happy that their kids were going to go into the mines. And then at other times, they were saying, like, expressing some sadness that they were the last of several generations of Utah coal miners who'd been down there. So the kind of mixed emotions of this difficult industry. You did a really great job of capturing that in the series. And the way in which, like, the kind of cultural festivals of these areas are still, like, so coal dependent. Like, this is, this is what this area is built on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, an interesting piece of that is a lot of that was also, there has historically been a strong labor movement in the area, right? Which I think, has also led to distinct politics. Like, now I think the coal industry is tied to a certain, more right-leaning politics, but historically this area was voted the highest percentage for Democratic candidates of anywhere in the state because it was a very pro-labor part of the state. So I think the coal culture is complicated, and it's not just one thing, and as it's evolved over time as national politics have also evolved.
Yeah. Kenny, have you run into that in your reporting? The sort of, like, personal attachments, that people have to kind of one version of an economy for Green River, the Green River area more broadly, and the sort of, the difficulties of imagining yourself as, like, an amenities-based economy and tourism and this other stuff that the Green River area is becoming known for.
Yeah, and it's definitely a little bit different in Green River as opposed to the west side of the county where most of Emery County lives, and that's where Hunter and Huntington are, and the coal mines, where there's much more of the cultural attachment to coal specifically. In Green River, there was more of a history of uranium milling and also mining further back, and then probably most recently uranium hauling. And there's when some of these newer projects come on, it's interesting to see, like, there's sometimes kind of a knee-jerk reaction, it seems, to, like, lithium, how that's politically coded. But when it's understood as, like, well, it's just like another mining job, even though it is, in many ways much different, or the process is somewhat similar to oil extraction that had, like, a brief era in Green River near the river. That kind of transfer, and also thinking about the nuclear history, there's a lot of attachment to the kind of lives that I would support. And I think it's similar to what Brooke's saying about not wanting to be made feel, not wanting to be, like, your whole family's livelihood be shrouded in guilt around, like, how, like, you grew up, or how your grandparents, like, raised the family. So there's definitely some element of that. There's somewhat of recognition that even within the county, there's not a infinite supply of coal, and it seems like maybe nuclear in some sense is kind of like, people are warming up to that. And
yeah. Well, Brooke, this is something you wrote about, that one of the that the count the county received funds to kind of talk about various pathways out of coal-based economy, and nuclear being one of them. But these areas are now caught up in the Trump administration's attempt to cut and rescind funds that were put forward in the Inflation Reduction Act and in other kind of Biden era spending policies. And I'm curious, you're the final of your 3 stories published right after Inauguration Day, and I guess I'm curious if you could give us an update on where some of those planning funds stand, whether they're still, have those funding streams been cut off, or are, and it'd be nice, if you can kind of expand on what those plans were before Trump took office. But what sort of impacts have the Trump spending cuts had on Utah's coal country.
Yeah, I think some of that is to be determined. But I'll first, kind of talk a bit about what the area has received and what the Trump administration may mean for that going forward. So these counties, specifically the Southeastern Regional Development Agency, received, or CERTA for short, received a couple grants that were connected to the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, to help communities, energy communities, communities that have been historically dependent on the fossil fuel industry, specifically to transition, to diversify their economies. So they received one grant, and their process with that did complete in September of this past year, that was focused on capacity building. And with that, they developed four possible, kind of four overlapping pathways forward. Nuclear energy being one of them. Nuclear is appealing to these areas, specifically for the coal plants, because it will likely create the same amount of jobs, according to research from the Department of Energy, where solar projects they may create 500 construction jobs if it's a really large project, but maybe only 10 permanent jobs. And in comparison, these plants currently employ over 400 people. So nuclear is a path they're interested in to specifically transition the Hunter plant. Maybe when I'm done talking about this, I know Kenny, I think, toured one of the plants recently and may have some updates on that. But to get back on track, nuclear, possible path for those. But nuclear takes a long time to develop and billions of dollars. So the other path they were exploring in kind of the more immediate term was carbon capture. But that is also a pretty undeveloped technology in terms of, at real commercial scale at this point. And then some other things, kind of just like repurposing existing assets. So like the area has transmission lines, it has water rights, as Kenny was speaking to, it has highways, an airport, it has a lot of things to potentially bring other industries in. Like, for example, Intermountain Electronics is a big manufacturing business in the area that a lot of miners are, who are leaving the mining industry are going over to Intermountain Electronics. Young people who don't want to go into mining are going to Intermountain Electronics. They historically manufactured equipment for the mining industry and now have diversified into other industries, including renewables. The other grant they received was called Communities Local Energy Action Program. And this one is still ongoing. I reached out to my sources actually today to get an update, and they said so far it hasn't been impacted, which I was actually surprised to hear, because the web pages, some of the web pages have been taken down. So I do not think that this program, I don't think there will be another cohort receiving funding for this, at least if the Trump administration has their way. I think, there's still a lot of questions over what they can and can't do, since some of this money, has already been allocated by Congress. So I think we're still in a lot of legal questions, but at least the website has been down. So that's unfortunate, because this program, and luckily it sounds like these areas still are receiving, the ones who have received funding are still receiving the technical assistance. So from like the National Renewable Energy Labs, basically, these areas may not have experts in nuclear, may not have experts in renewables. So connecting these historically fossil fuel producing communities with experts in the Department of Energy and these national labs that we have across the country. So they're providing technical assistance on siting to see if nuclear energy is possible here. But I mean, the hard thing is like these grants, they were not huge pots of money. Like I think combined, it was like $150,000 for those two grants. The technical assistance is obviously worth a lot as well. But the big thing for them is that it was possibly going to open up millions of dollars. Was billions of dollars set aside for communities that went through these grants to then continue to receive assistance on the energy transition. And as we've seen, Trump has frozen, or the administration has frozen, rescinded, or at least tried to a lot of these funds, and we're seeing some still go forward. At least I've seen a few pieces that we thought were going to be off the table coming back on, but frankly, it just is really chaotic right now, and I don't have a super clear picture on what will be possible. But at least it seems like offices that were leading this are, being stripped of workers, defunded, all of those things.
Yeah, I don't think you're the only one who has more questions than answers about where some of that funding stands. Last question for you, Kenny, before we wrap up here. But we're talking about an innovative little solar tax program that involves setting aside some funds for affordable housing in Green River, alongside a solar field attempt that I believe is unsuccessful. And I'm curious if you can kind of give us the state of play on that. Where do solar policies stand in your community right now?
Yeah, so in the last several years, there's been a lot more interest in developing solar fields across Emery County. There's a lot of public lands and just plenty of open space. And at some point, the county created a community reinvestment agency, which is the 3 county commissioners and I think two people that are appointed. And they in the next few years, they're saying, they haven't like pinned a certain number, but they're saying there'll be tens of millions of dollars in this fund that is a tax that's levied on these solar farms that has to be spent on affordable housing in some sense of the term. And still in the process, as a lot of these solar fields are being built, and like figuring out what those like policies are, and how they would like to distribute that. So it could be subsidizing expanding infrastructure for towns to lower the cost of housing. It could be supporting like a home construction class in the high schools that existed, prior to 2008. Or it could be grants to individual projects as a source of gap funding. And in my day job, we're so far the only recipient of those funds for a project in Green River. Now, most of the solar farms, well, all of the solar farms are outside of Green River. They're mostly on the west side of the county. There's some great photography in Brooke's stories of the juxtaposing the solar farm by Hunter and by by the power plants. But there's a massive farm that's near Moore, that's not too far off of I-70, and especially near Farron. There's just you're just driving along Highway 10, these massive fields, and a little bit towards Castledale as well. There was also, a couple years ago, there was an attempt to build a solar farm inside of Green River City, and it would have been accomplished through rezoning part of a parcel and also amending the code to allow solar farms in commercial zones. And after a public hearing and kind of several um, meetings of the planning commission, the city council, which even if it's not officially a public hearing, everyone is comfortable enough to just kind of make it a public hearing throughout, which I'm sure is frustrating for them, but it's really, really interesting to go to. That was not successful in either rezoning and also in allowing more permissible zoning for solar farms. So there's nothing near Green River City right now, and um, while there's all kinds of opinions about it, it seemed like a lot of the pushback was that people would maybe like it, but if it was behind a hill where you couldn't see it, and especially if people coming into Green River the first time wouldn't really see it. So uh, it's remains to be seen whether we'll get solar farms in or around Green River City, but within the county there's massive ones being built, and it seems like that fund is going to get pretty sizable.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And yeah, it's all the facets of the energy transition seem to be, kind of manifesting in really concrete and interesting ways right in the area where both of you have been covering this stuff. So you've both done such amazing work. It'd be nice to know for listeners where they can find you. So Kenny, where can interested readers find you and the Green River Observer online?
You can go to thegreenriverobserver.substack.com, and if you would like a print copy, if you sign up for a paid subscription, I'll mail one out to you. Or if you move to Green River, I'll send it to your PO box.
And Brooke, what about you? And what are you working on next?
Yeah, you can find these stories online at hcn.org. And right now I'm working on a story about solar worker cooperatives. So continuing in this energy transition beat, looking at some of the ongoing labor issues there. Yeah. And I don't know if Nick, you want me to sign off with a little note to our listeners about HCN?
You wrote the stories. You might as well do it.
Okay, cool. So for those that don't know, High Country News is a nonprofit, reader-supported publication. We've been covering the West for more than 50 years, and we can't create stories like this without readers and listeners like you. So if you'd like to support our work, go to hcn.org where you can subscribe or support us in other ways.
All right. Well, thank you both. That was fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.